Once upon a time, in the middle of winter, when snow fell like feathers from the sky, a queen sat by her window sewing. The window frame was made of black wood, and as she sewed, she pricked her finger with the needle. 3 drops of blood fell onto the snow. The queen looked at the bright red drops on the white snow and the black frame and thought, if only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as this wood. Before long, her wish came true. She gave birth to a little daughter whose skin was white as snow, whose lips were red as blood, and whose hair was black as ebony. They named her Snow White. But not long after, the queen became ill and died, and the king was left to raise the child without her. After some time, the king married again. The new queen was beautiful, proud, and cold-hearted, and she could not bear the thought that anyone might be more beautiful than she was. She owned a magic mirror and would stand before it each day and ask, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would answer, "You are the fairest of them all." This pleased the queen, because the mirror always spoke the truth. Snow White grew older, and the years passed. She became kind and gentle, and her beauty grew with her. One day, when Snow White was still very young, the queen asked her mirror the same question. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" This time the mirror replied, "You are fair, my queen, it is true. But Snow White is far fairer than you." The queen's face turned pale with anger. Jealousy burned in her heart like fire. From that moment, she could not rest. Every time she saw Snow White, she felt as if a sharp thorn were twisting inside her. At last, she decided she would get rid of the girl forever. The queen called a huntsman who served the palace. "Take Snow White into the forest," she ordered, "and kill her there. Bring me proof that you have done it." The huntsman was frightened, but he had to obey. The next day, he led Snow White deep into the woods. Snow White trusted him and walked beside him, gathering flowers and talking happily until they reached a lonely place where the trees grew thick and the light was dim. Then, the huntsman stopped and drew his knife. Snow White looked at his face and saw tears in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked, trembling. "Why are you doing this?" The huntsman's hand shook. "I cannot," he whispered. "The queen has commanded me to kill you, but you are innocent and good. Run away, Snow White. Run into the forest as far as you can. Never return to the palace." Snow White burst into tears, but she did not waste time. She turned and ran, her small feet carrying her over roots and stones. She ran until her breath came in sobs and her heart pounded like a drum. When night began to fall, she was lost, alone, and terrified. In the deep forest, wild animals watched her from the shadows, but none harmed her. Deer stepped lightly past, rabbits hid among the bushes, and birds fluttered above, as if guiding her. Finally, Snow White saw a small cottage tucked between the trees. A faint light shone from its windows. She went to the door and knocked, but no one answered. Slowly, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The cottage was tiny but tidy. A small table stood in the center, set with 7 little plates, 7 little cups, and 7 little chairs. Along one wall were 7 small beds with neat blankets. Snow White was hungry and thirsty. Lose its leaves. She did not want to take much from anyone, so she ate just a little from each plate and drank a small sip from each cup. Then she was so tired that her legs could hardly hold her up. She tried the beds, one by one, but each was either too long or too short. At last she found the 7th bed, which fit her perfectly, and she lay down and fell asleep at once. When it grew dark, the owners of the cottage returned. They were 7 dwarfs who worked in the mountains, digging for gold and precious stones. They came in carrying their tools and candles, and the moment they entered, they noticed something strange. "Who has been sitting in my chair?" said the first. "Who has been eating from my plate?" said the second. "Who has been drinking from my cup?" said the third. Each dwarf found the same until they reached the beds. "Who has been lying in my bed?" one asked. Then the 7th dwarf looked and cried, "Someone is sleeping in my bed." The dwarfs gathered around and lifted their candles. In the soft light, they saw Snow White, sleeping peacefully. She looked so sweet and harmless that they did not want to wake her roughly. They whispered among themselves until, at last, she stirred and opened her eyes. Snow White sat up, startled. When she saw the 7 small men standing around her, she was frightened at first, but they spoke kindly. "Do not be afraid," said the eldest dwarf. "Who are you? And how did you come here?" A Snow White told them everything. How her mother died, how her stepmother became jealous, how the huntsman spared her, and how she ran through the forest until she found their cottage. The dwarfs looked at one another with sympathy. "If you will keep house for us," they said, "cook, sew, wash, and keep everything neat and clean, then you may stay with us, and you shall have all you need." A Snow White was grateful beyond words. "Yes," she said. "I will gladly do that." And so she stayed with the 7 dwarfs. Each morning the dwarfs went into the mountains to work, and Snow White stayed behind. She swept the floors, cooked simple meals, and made the cottage warm and bright. Before they left each day, the dwarfs warned her, "Be careful of the queen. She will search for you. Do not let anyone in, no matter what they say." A Snow White promised to be careful. Back at the palace, the queen stood before her magic mirror, sure that Snow White was gone. She asked Mirror, mirror on the wall, "Who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You are fair, my queen, it is true. But Snow White is far fairer than you. She lives in the forest, in a cottage with 7 dwarfs." The queen's fury returned, stronger than ever. "So she still lives," she hissed. "Then I will finish what I began." The queen was skilled in dark tricks and disguises. She changed her appearance to look like an old peddler woman with a bent back and a rough voice. Then she set out for the forest with a basket of bright, laced ribbons. When she reached the dwarf's cottage, She knocked on the door and called, "Fine ribbons for sale! Pretty ribbons!" Snow White was inside, alone. She remembered the dwarf's warning, but she peeked through the window and saw only a harmless-looking old woman. I should not open the door, Snow White told herself, yet the ribbons were beautiful, and she had been alone all day. At last she opened the door just a little. "Good day, dear child," said the disguised queen. "Look at these lovely ribbons. They would suit you wonderfully." Snow White hesitated, but the woman spoke so sweetly that she let her in. The queen took a ribbon and offered to lace it for Snow White. "You must look neat," she said. Before Snow White could refuse, the queen pulled the ribbon tight, too tight. Snow White's breath vanished. Her eyes widened, and she fell to the floor as if dead. The queen smiled cruelly. "No, you will never be fairer than I," she whispered, and she hurried away. That evening, the dwarfs returned home and found Snow White lying on the floor. At once they saw the ribbon pulled tight around her waist. They cut it quickly, and as soon as it loosened, Snow White began to breathe again. Her color returned, and she opened her eyes. Snow White wept with shame. "I was foolish," she said. "I should not have let anyone in." The dwarfs forgave her, but they warned her again, even more firmly, and Snow White promised she would never disobey. Meanwhile, the queen returned to the palace and went to the mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You are fair, my queen, it is true, but Snow White is far fairer than you. She lives in the forest, in a cottage with 7 dwarfs." The queen nearly screamed. "Still alive!" she cried. "Then I will use a trick she cannot escape." Again she disguised herself, this time as a different old woman, and carried a comb that looked beautifully carved. But this comb was poisoned. She walked to the cottage and called, "Combs for sale! Fine combs for your hair!" Snow White was alone again. She remembered the ribbon, and she shook her head. "I will not open the door," she said. "Oh, you poor child," the old woman called, sounding gentle and hurt. "At least let me show you through the window. You need not let me in." A Snow White thought that seemed safe. She opened the door, just a crack, and reached out her hand to take the comb. The queen slipped it into Snow White's hair at once. The poison worked immediately. Snow White fell down without a sound. The queen left, satisfied. But when the dwarfs returned, they found Snow White collapsed. They searched for what was wrong until they noticed the comb in her hair. They pulled it out, and at once Snow White woke, gasping. Again, Snow White promised never to open the door. Again, the dwarfs warned her. But the queen's hatred had grown beyond reason. For the 3rd time, the queen asked the mirror, and for the 3rd time it told her Snow White still lived with the dwarfs. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Then I will bring her something so tempting she cannot resist." She prepared a beautiful apple, red and glossy, but filled with poison. It looked perfect, sweet, crisp, and harmless. She disguised herself as a farmer's wife and went to the forest. At the cottage, she knocked and called, "Fresh apples!" "Beautiful apples." Snow White shook her head from inside. "I cannot let anyone in," she said. "Why not?" the woman asked. "Are you afraid?" "See, I will cut the apple in half. I will eat one half, and you may have the other. Then you will know it is safe." She sliced the apple. One half was poisoned. The other looked clean. But the queen was clever. She offered Snow White the poisoned half, while keeping the safe half for herself. Snow White's mouth watered. She had never seen an apple so fine. And when the old woman ate from her half and smiled, Snow White's doubt faded. She opened the door and took one bite. The poison struck instantly. Snow White fell to the ground, motionless, as if life had left her body. The queen laughed softly. "No," she said. "No one will wake you." She hurried away through the trees. When the dwarfs returned, they found Snow White lying still and cold. They cried out in despair. They tried everything, calling her name, shaking her gently, giving her water, but nothing worked. Snow White did not wake. The dwarfs wept for a long time. They could not bear to bury her in the dark earth, because she looked as beautiful in death as she had in life. So they built a glass coffin and placed her inside, where they could still see her face. They wrote her name on it and kept watch, grieving day after day. Time passed, and Snow White lay as if asleep. Then one day a prince was riding through the forest and saw the dwarfs' cottage. He stopped and met the dwarfs. And when he noticed the glass coffin, he was struck by Snow White's beauty. "Who is she?" he asked. The dwarfs told him the story. The prince listened with sorrow. He could not look away from Snow White's face. At last he said, "Please let me take her with me. I will honor her and care for her." The dwarfs refused at first, but the prince's sadness was sincere, and they saw he meant no harm. Finally they agreed. The prince's servants lifted the glass coffin and carried it through the forest. As they walked, one servant stumbled on a root, and the coffin jolted sharply. The sudden movement dislodged the piece of poisoned apple that had been stuck in Snow White's throat. It flew out, and Snow White suddenly drew a deep breath. Her eyes opened. The servants cried out in shock, and the prince stepped forward, overwhelmed with joy. "You are alive," he said. Snow White sat up slowly, confused at first, then remembering everything. The prince offered her his hand and spoke kindly. He told her he had never seen anyone so gentle and fair. And he asked her to come with him to his palace, where she would be safe and where he wished, if she would, to become his wife. Snow White thought of the palace where her stepmother ruled, and of the little cottage where the dwarfs had saved her again and again. She looked at the prince's honest face and felt hope rise inside her. "Yes," she said quietly. "I will go." The dwarfs were sad to see her leave, but they were also happy that she would have a new life. They hugged her and reminded her to be wise and careful. And Snow White promised she would never forget them. Snow White traveled with the prince to the palace, and in time preparations were made for a wedding. Far away, the wicked queen stood before her mirror, sure she had finally won. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? The mirror answered, "You are fair, my queen, it is true. But the young bride at the prince's palace is far fairer than you." The queen's heart twisted with rage. "A bride," she whispered. Who could it be? Curiosity and jealousy drove her. She dressed in her finest clothes and went to the prince's palace to see this new bride with her own eyes. When she arrived at the celebration and looked upon Snow White, she recognized her immediately. The queen froze, as if her own evil had finally caught up with her. Snow White stood calm and radiant, surrounded by people who cared for her, no longer powerless and alone. The queen's anger could not save her now. Her tricks were uncovered, and she was removed from the palace so she could never harm Snow White again. Snow White's new life began at last, safe, loved, and free. Snow White married the prince, and the kingdom rejoiced. She did not forget the 7 dwarfs who had protected her, and she honored their kindness always. And so, Snow White, who had suffered through jealousy and danger, found peace and happiness. Because goodness, courage, and the help of true friends can overcome even the darkest envy.